Welcome to Exploring Turkey. I am your host, Andy Martin, coming to you from the great city and province of Konya, home of Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, known in the West as Rumi. His most famous quote is this: "Come, come, who or whatever you are. Should you be an unbeliever or pagan, still come. Our lodge is not a lodge of despair. With 100 repentances unheeded you may be, still come." Konya is a beautiful and historic area. Its history dates back to over 6,800 years BC. Also, this was the ancient Anatolian Seljuk state capital. This city is indeed beautiful. We are excited to bring it to you. Our tour of this land begins now. Behind me is the beautiful Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi Museum and Mausoleum. This building was constructed in the 13th century. However, the beautiful green tiled tower behind me marks the burial place of Mevlana. The tower was added in the 14th century. Also, this tower is the symbol of Konya. Inside the museum section of this facility, you can find many personal belongings that were Mevlana's. Also, there are many items that are important to the Mevlevi order. Also, there are different translations of the Quran, different historical items that were belonging to the Seljuk and Ottoman periods. Indeed, making this museum and mausoleum a very important part of Islamic history and the very center of the history of Konya. Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, or Rumi as he is known in the West, a great poet and human being, most esteemed representative of Islamic history. He was born in Bel in 1207. He, his father, members of their family and friends came and settled here in Konya in this Anatolian region. They came here. His first teacher was his father. He was influenced, however, by many other teachers and philosophers of his day. Also behind us is his mausoleum, where Rumi is buried, as well as the museum of the Mevlevi order and Mevlana. Come, come, who or whatever you are. Should you be an unbeliever or a pagan, still come. Our lodge is not a lodge of despair. With 100 repentances unheeded you may be, still come. The most famous quote from Mevlana. As you can see, many people have come here from different countries and nationalities to visit him. Behind me is the mausoleum area of Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi. He had written several books of poetry, one of them called the Mesnevi. He had 7 points of advice that we'll share with you now. The 7 points of advice from his poems were: in generosity and helping others, be like a river. In compassion and grace, be like sun. In concealing others' faults, be like night. In anger and fury, be like dead. In modesty and humility, be like earth. In tolerance, be like a sea. Either exist as you are, or be as you look. Here in the Mevlana Museum, there are many artifacts very important to the history of Islam as well as to the Mevlevi order. There are many writings and books of poems from various times and empires that are found here, as well as musical instruments used by the Mevlevi order. Mevlana himself actually played the ney. The ney is a reed flute, a flute made of reed, and he wrote a poem about this. The poem goes that the ney, from the day it is cut, it so anguishes and lows and mourns and longs to be restored to its life again as it was before it was made into an instrument. The beautiful sound of the ney can be heard here as you visit this mausoleum and museum. Also found here are very important artifacts and articles from Mevlana's life as well as from the Mevlevi order. We've now begun to take a closer look at some of the personal belongings of Mevlana. Here on the top shelf we have some hats that he wore, as well as on this one we find a shoulder strap or shoulder covering that's beautifully decorated, also a blue jacket that belonged to Mevlana, and below we have a robe that he used in the 13th century. This book is the Mesnevi. Mevlana, he had many poems that he wrote and that he said during his life. His students wrote them by hand and made this collection called the Mesnevi. In this part of the museum, there are many different translations and also writings by hand of the Quran from the Seljuk and Ottoman periods. In this area of the museum, we have a display representing the life of the dervishes of the Mevlevi order, those who are the closest followers of Mevlana. Also here we have represented the dervish who would go and take care of all of the shopping and getting the food, bringing it back. This dervish was responsible for cooking. So these are examples of their lives. Over here we also have items that were used in the kitchen for food preparation and water. In this area of the Mevlevi Order Museum, we find a depiction of what their life would have been like. Here we have several dervishes that are seated around a table. This is a traditional style table that was used for meals. Also, we see their clothing is very interesting as well, with the long black robes. They wore the same style hat and shirts. Also, they wore a different kind of uniform of sorts when they were doing the whirling dervishes, which are known around the world. In this area, the board that was used is the sema. This is a portable sema board and it has a nail in the very center. This again, their rotation during their time of whirling was much like the rotation or patterned after the Earth's rotation on its axis. In this part of the museum, we see an example of a Mevlevi order sitting room.